Very good. I trust you've had a fruitful day. I was going to say happy, but I hope it has been happy. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. I just want to knock something off here. That's it. That's better. Good. Right. So we had a break yesterday for the moon day. The next discourse I want to look at is a discourse that's written about this man called Upali. And again, it touches upon karma. So I thought it's a long discourse, split it into 2 nights. So I thought it might be good to just revise quickly what we've done so far on karma, and then move on to this. So if you remember, the first thing that really connects us to what's happening now is the that law. Because that happened in the past, this happens now. Because that didn't happen, this doesn't happen now. Because this happens now, this happens now. Because this didn't happen now, this doesn't happen now. And one was this linear causality, which gives us a feeling of fate, and the other one was an immediacy, a contingency, which gives us a feeling. When you put them both together, then you get this continuous creativity. So that was the first thing. Although that was connected to dependent origination, it still applies, of course, to all the events that happen in our lives. And then we had oh dear me, where is it now? Just a minute. Here we are. Have I lost it? Just that general statement of that we are heirs to our karmas, owners of our karma, born of our karma, and so on and so forth. I seem to have lost the page, unfortunately. Trying to find it amongst 150 different discourses is going to be a bit difficult. But at least the Buddha's stressing there this the importance of oh, what a shame I can't remind you of it. No, I can't find it. Unfortunate. I thought it was the next discourse along, but it's not. So there was this understanding that karma is something that we own. It is we're born of it from moment to moment, and that we have a control over it through, remember, this process of will. So if we don't will something, an idea, or something that we say, or something that we do, then of course that habit, which is the karmic response, the karmic consequence of past actions, it dies out. And if we reinforce those actions or habits that we feel are wholesome, then we do it. We reinforce it through the way we think, the way we speak, and of course our actions. So that's the karmic thing. And then there was this problem of, well, what's your personal karma? So that's really almost impossible to tell because there's so many factors that come into any present moment. Remember, there was all the business of the earth, physics and chemistry, whatever happens, tsunamis, earthquakes and all that, and the good weather we've had, and now it's horrible. All that is not our personal karma. And it's the same with the seed, with the body we've received from our parents. That's not personal karma. What we do with it is, but the actual physicality of our nature is something that's been given to us through past generations. And then we had the mind. So the mind also has a way of working. It's certain programs are set, like for instance, the ability to learn language. We also mentioned this whole business of social conditioning. So that is, we are as children conditioned to think and feel like our society, like our nation, whatever it is. So we carry within us already all those vices and virtues that belong to our ethnic group, to our nation, and so on and so forth. And the problem there is that when we see something is unwholesome, to be quick not to indulge it as a thought pattern, definitely not to speak it, and of course not to act upon it. So this was that whole business of social karma. It's still very, it's what's individual is how it manifests through us, and we're responsible for that. And then there was karma, of course, which is this ethical part of our nature, how we relate to the world, to other beings, to nature, to ourselves, and so on. So that relationship there, the Buddha says, is absolutely key to how we will enjoy life or not. You know, if you give credence, some credence to future lives, it has an effect on how we will be reborn, definitely throughout our lives. And not to confuse happiness, which emotional happiness, which comes and goes, with some deep meaningfulness in our lives, which gives us a true inner joy. So that's why, you know, people will sacrifice their lives for their religion, for their political, lots of political prisoners, because that is what gives their life meaning, and that's what's crucial. Frankel logotherapy, I can't remember his first name, but he was the one who survived the concentration camps, and through it developed a therapy called logotherapy, which was really because he had observed in the concentration camps that those who still had meaning for their lives, they were the ones who would generally survive, whereas those who lost meaning, who felt their lives had become meaningless or useless, would often succumb to the conditions. So that's where we've got to now. So here we've got a slight nuance coming up on Upali. So on this occasion, the Nagantha Natiputta. Now, in the Buddhist text, he's called Nigantha, part of a group, you say. By his own people, he's called the Mahavira, the great man. So he's the leader of the Jains. He's the one who founded the Jains. And he's the son of Nataputta. And he's staying in Nalanda, which became a huge university, with an assembly there. And there was a particular Nigantha, one of the order members, called Diga Tapasi. Diga means tall, so he was known as Tall Tapasi. And he was wandering for alms around there when he came across the Blessed One, who was sitting in Pavarika's mango grove. And so after they exchanged greetings, etc., he took a low seat and sat to the side. So in other words, he's honoring the Blessed One. And the Blessed One asks him, Tapasi, how many kinds of action does the Nigantha Nataputta describe for the performance of evil action, for the perpetration of an evil action? So in other words, what sort of action, right? So he's thinking about mind, speech, or body would create an evil action. So Nigantha, Tipasi replies, the Nigantha Nataputta is not accustomed to use the word action. So this is the Buddha's word kamma, an action, a doing. The Nigantha Nataputta is accustomed to the description of rod. Now, the word for rod is danda, which is a walking stick, but then, of course, it became a beating stick. So every time we do something evil, it was like we beat ourselves, and hence the leader of the Jains would call them a rod. Then Tipasi, how many kinds of rod does the Nigantha describe for the performance of evil, for the perpetration of evil? So he says the Nigantha describes 3 kinds of rods, and they are the bodily rod, the verbal rod, and the mental rod. So we have to remember that Tipasi, or the Nigantha, taught that actions which were not intended but did harm still had karmic consequences. So I remember, for instance, walking in the dark, fairly dark, while I was at Gaia House, and inadvertently stood upon a snail, and of course that crunching sound, and then the squish. So of course I lifted my foot as soon as I could, but of course the poor snail had died or was dying. Now, of course, I didn't mean to do that. That was not a purposeful act. But that doesn't mean to say that the snail didn't suffer, you see. And so, in a sense, what the Nigantha is arguing is that, well, you still cause suffering either by carelessness or by accident. It doesn't matter. You've caused suffering, and therefore there's some karmic result, you see. But let's carry on. He says, well, how then, Tipasi, the Buddha asks, is the bodily rod, the verbal rod, another, and the mental rod still another? So this is the meaning that whether you mean it or not, you still have the karma consequence. The bodily rod is one, friend Gautama, the verbal rod is another, and the mental rod is another. Of these 3 kinds of rod, Tapasi, thus analyzed and distinguished, which kind of rod does the Nigantha describe as the most reprehensible for the performance of evil action, for the perpetration of evil action? The bodily rod, the verbal rod, or the mental rod? Of these 3 kinds of actions, friend Gautama, he describes the bodily rod, the actions by the body, as the most reprehensible for the performance of evil action, for the penetration of evil action, and not so much the verbal or the mental rod. So now we have this exchange, because remember, they don't have mobile phones to record anything in those days. Do you say bodily rod, Tapasi? I say the bodily rod, friend Gautama. You said the bodily rod, Tapasi. I did say the bodily rod, friend Gautama. So you actually did say the bodily rod, Tapasi. I did say the bodily rod, friend Gautama. Actually, I'm adding to it just to make it a bit more palatable. And thus the Blessed One made Nigantha maintain his statement up to a 3rd time. So that's to be absolutely sure that this is what you mean. Now the Nigantha Tapasi asked the Blessed One, and you, friend Gautama, how many kinds of rod do you describe for the performance of evil action? Tapasi, the Tathagata, remember that's how he referred to himself, the transcendent one, the one who had arrived, yes, the one who had arrived. The Tathagata is not accustomed to use the description rod. The Tathagata is accustomed to use the word action. So one was danda, which is the rod for beating, beat oneself with bad actions, and the Buddha uses the word kama, which means action. So remember, literally, kama is just the action. The consequence is vipaka, right? If you come across those 2 words. These days, of course, we've accepted the word karma really to mean, your comeuppance. Friend Gautama, how many kinds of action do you describe? There are 3 kinds of actions, the bodily, the verbal, and the mental. Oh, then, friend Gautama, is the bodily reaction, verbal reaction, and mental reaction still another? In other words, are they not? Are they separate actions, like in the Jain system? And the bodily action is one, the verbal action is another, and the mental action is still another. But of these 3 kinds of actions, thus analyzed and distinguished, which kind of action do you describe as the most reprehensible for the performance of evil action, penetration of evil action? Is it the bodily, the verbal, or the mental? Of these 3 kinds of actions, Tipasi, thus analyzed and distinguished, I describe the mental action as the most reprehensible for the performance of evil. Did you say mental action, friend Gotama? I did say mental action. Do you say the mental action, friend Gotama? I say the mental action. So you say that the mental action is the cause of the performance of evil, friend Gotama. I did say it. So 3 times, you see. Thus, the Nigantha made the Blessed One maintain his statement up to the 3rd time, after which he rose from his seat and went to the Nigantha Nataputta. So he left after that. So he didn't get into conversation any further. Now, on that occasion, the Nigantha was seated together with a large assembly of lay people from Balaka, and the prominent among them was Upali. And the Nigantha Nataputta saw the Nigantha Diga Tapasi coming and said, "Now, where have you come from in the middle of the day?" "I'm coming from the presence of the recluse Gotama." "Did you have conversation with the recluse Gotama?" I did. I have some conversation." "What was your conversation with him, Tapasi?" Then Tapasi relates to Nigantha the entire conversation. And the Nigantha says, Tapasi has answered the recluse Gotama like a well-taught disciple who understands his teacher's dispensation rightly. What does the trivial mental rod count for in comparison with the gross bodily rod? In other words, from Nigantha's point of view, a mental thought doesn't have any big effect outside the mind. So how can you compare it to a physical action, which obviously has a greater effect? On the contrary, the bodily rod is the most reprehensible for the performance of evil, for the perpetration of evil action. Now, when this was said, the householder Upali said to Nigantha, "Good Venerable, the Venerable Tapasi has answered the recluse Gotama like a well-taught disciple who understands the teaching of the Buddha, who understands the teaching of your dispensation. What does the trivial rod count for in comparison to the gross bodily rod? Now, Venerable Sir, I shall go and refute the recluse Gotama's doctrine on the basis of this statement. If the recluse Gotama maintains before me what the Venerable Tapasi made him maintain, then just as a strong man, now you've heard this before, might seize a long-haired ram by the hair and drag him to and drag him fro and drag him around about, so in debate I will drag the recluse Gotama to and drag him fro and drag him all about." So that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight, because tomorrow night we have this wonderful conversation with Upali, and I shall leave you in suspense as to what happens by the end of it. So I can only hope these little readings are of some assistance, do not cause even greater confusion, and that they inspire you to continue your practice till you are fully liberated sooner rather than later. So we can do a little bit of practice.